Right, so we have the deck of cards, and I've shuffled them, so I've no idea what's on the top, and I just take the top one off, see what it is. So this is a command card. Nothing I can do with it at the moment, so no troops on the table. So I'm just going to hand that to the British side, and they put that to one side for later use in the turn. And the next one is activating leader 5. So what that allows me to do is now to activate the 5th leader on the mutineer side, and he can deploy any groups under his command. When a group comes on the table, it has to be accompanied by a leader, which means leader 5 is one of the status 1 leaders, so he's not particularly high status, and he's only got one group under his command. So I'm going to put him on the table now, and his group can deploy, depending on the troop types, they can deploy within a certain distance of the deployment zone. His troop type, I think, can only deploy within 6 inches. Right, so there's the deployment zone. This chap here is the leader, and he is controlling a group of Badmashes with big choppers. And once you're deployed, a unit can't deploy and then move, so there's nothing else that this group can do in this turn anyway. But had he been a status 1 leader, and he has an initiative of 1, but had he been a higher status leader and them not being deploying, he might have been able to, or he would have been able to, use a 2nd initiative point to do something else with this group. That'll make more sense in a minute, but for the time being, when you're deploying, there's not a great deal you can do other than just put your troops on the table. So that card now goes into a discard pile, and we turn over the next card, which is leader 2. So this chap here is leader 2, and he has brought on a formation of 2 groups of well-ordered sepoys who are in an open column formation. So he's brought them on immediately in formation. But again, because you can't deploy and then move, there's nothing else that he can do with those troops for this turn. So what I'm going to do now is sort of skip forward a little bit. I'm going to carry on playing the game and show you the next sort of salient point, as it were. But that card goes into the discard pile, and you turn another one over. So this is going to be British leader this time, and so the game goes on. So I'll carry on with the game off camera and show you the next turning point in the game. Okay, now we've reached a point where the mutineers have got 3 units on the table. They've got a formation, a unit of sepoys there. They're not well, I think they're defined as sepoy rabble, so they are armed with muskets, but all the figures in the group I've given them waving their tulwars, their swords, just so that I can distinguish them, but they are actually armed with muskets, and they've got that unit of Badmashes on the table. And the British have got on their leader 1, who is their highest status leader, with a unit of cavalry, which is a group, so it can't form up into a distinct formation, so it's just dispersed cavalry. And the same there with that group there. They are loyal native infantry commanded by an NCO in the middle. But the reason I've interrupted play to show you is that as the cards have been turning up, the mutineers now have all 4 of their command cards out, and because it's early in the game, they couldn't do much with single cards. For instance, the British have still only got 2 command cards out. But having 4 cards out allows you to activate a leader again, even if he's already been activated once this turn. So whilst the opportunity is there, I am going to activate this leader again here. Now, as I said earlier, he has 2 initiative points because he's a status 2 leader, and there is something that has been kind of I have been puzzled in the rules here, but essentially each command initiative allows you to do various things, and the wording of the rules is that when activated, a leader can use 1 command initiative, and the 1 is in bold type, to do the following. And then there's a number of bullet points of the things that he can do with 1 initiative. Now, what I was wondering was, one of the things he can do is activate a group for deploying, moving, firing, loading, presenting, or any combination of these. And he gets 2 actions. The group gets 2 actions, or the formation. And that means that you can move twice with 1 initiative point. Now, what puzzled me was, why is this in black type? Does it mean he can only do that once? So he can only use that once, or not? And I have decided not, that he can actually use the 2nd initiative to do this again, which means that you can effectively get 4 movement actions out of a command status of 2. And the reason I've decided that is that another one of the things he can do with 1 initiative is to direct the fire of a formation. Now, you can't direct the fire unless you've ordered the group to fire in the first place. So, and that comes under this one here, deploy, move, or fire, and so on. So, in other words, you would have had to use 1 to do this, and then 1 to do that. So, I think that allows you to do any one of these more than 1 time. You know, it's something, it does mean a status 4 leader could effectively get 8 movement actions out of 1 unit. And as I'll probably show you later in the game, it means you can move a hell of a long way, and that's one of the things I mean about the wording not being particularly clear. There's another one here somewhere, if I can find it. There. An activated leader who is attached to or within command range of a group or formation can use 1 command initiative to do the following: rally, act independently, and so on. And that one isn't in bold type. And I don't understand why not. Why is that one in normal type and this one here in bold? It does sort of suggest that there's a distinction between this group of things that you can do with an initiative and that group. It's not very obvious to me. But anyway, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to play it the way I think is correct, and use both initiatives this guy has to activate this group, this formation, for 2 lots of movement for each initiative. So he gets 2 actions per initiative, and he can do that twice. So he's got 4 actions of movement. And the way you move is you roll a dice, d6, and normal regular infantry just move that distance in inches. Moving through broken ground, you reduce the dice roll by 1. So basically, to stop all the waffle, I'm going to roll 4 dice and reduce each dice by 1, and then move that total through the broken ground and out this side. Right, so they rolled a total of 13, so take 4 pips off that brings them down to 9, so I move them 9 inches. They wouldn't have been. They could have increased the dice roll and run, but you're not allowed to run through broken ground. And because the rear unit, I haven't been able to line them up precisely because of all the scenery. They're still in formation though. Because they're still in the broken ground, you go by the slowest speed of whichever group in the formation applies, so they'll still be taking 1 off their dice pips if they move again in the next turn. And also, a nice thing about these rules that I haven't mentioned yet is that these cards came up interspersed with leadership cards, but had you turned up 3 command cards, doesn't matter what the colour is, red or blue, sequentially, then that can trigger a random event. So when that happens, I'll show you, but it's a nice little random kind of factor that can happen in the game, a bit like blunders in Black Powder. Right, so these cards now, I've used them, so these go into the discard pile, and we turn over the next card, and it's a red command card, so I give that to the British player, and the next one is Leader 1 for the Mutineers. So I'm going to carry on like that and film again when I get to another salient point. Right, so I've just turned up the Tiffin card, which signifies the end of the turn. So these 3 cards still left in the deck don't get revealed. Now, there's a difference between a turn and what's described as a chapter. If the Tiffin card is the first card to be revealed off of the deck, then that signifies the end of a chapter. So I'll come to that when that happens, if it happens. But for the time being, we're at the end of a turn. Now, at the end of the turn, the players are allowed to spend any command cards that they haven't so far used. So the British player has 3 command cards over there that he hasn't used, but there isn't actually anything much that he can do with them, so they are going to be effectively wasted this turn. Had there been a game going on with the sides meeting in the middle of the table, then there would have been more to do with them. So I'm going to end the turn there, but just to point out that the British player has still got 2 units to come on the table. I did show you that cavalry. There it is, cavalry earlier. The Mutineer player has got all but 1 of its units on, and it has also got some cavalry on itself. Now, 2 things, at least 3 things to do with cavalry. One is that the leader moves at the same rate as the unit is attached to. So this leader, he's the force commander on the Mutineer side. He is on an elephant, obviously, elephant in the room. Doesn't matter about the speed. There isn't actually a movement rate for elephants in the rules, but whilst he's with that unit, I'm going to call him moving at a cavalry rate anyway. But had he been on foot, for instance, he would have been moving at the speed of the cavalry until he detaches himself. Another thing is that these guys here are scouting cavalry. The British cavalry are impact cavalry. So the impact cavalry were allowed to deploy 9 inches from the deployment zone. Scouting cavalry is allowed to deploy 18 inches from the deployment zone, which is why they're quite a distance from the deployment zone point. And the final thing with cavalry is that when they come on the table, unless the player states, they are assumed to be moving at canter rate. Now I'm going to say that both cavalry units have come on at walking pace. The reason being that you can change direction when the cavalry is walking. You can deviate 45 degrees from the direction, not from the direction, but from the what am I trying to say? If you take that figure there, he can't deviate 45 degrees that way, but he could deviate 45 degrees that way, keeping his facing that way, if he's moving at a canter. Whereas at a walk, you can change direction as you move, but obviously you move a shorter distance. So both cavalry units, I'm saying, are walking when they come on the table. And yeah, that's about it for the end of that turn. All the cards get put back in the deck, so we take those, put them in with those, and shuffle the whole lot up and play another turn. Thought I'd show you this. So I've been turning cards over. It's Leader 2, Mutineer Leader 2 has just turned up, and if you remember, there they are now, but they were in closed column, just emerging from this piece of broken ground. So what I decided I wanted to do was to move them up this far and then form them into a line so that they could check any progress coming this way. These guys here, by the way, have come on the table. They are native skirmishers under the command of an NCO. So I rolled the first. This chap here is status 2, so he has 2 initiatives. So for his first initiative, he initiated the column to move, and they get 2 actions, so he got 2 movement actions. So I rolled 2 dice, giving me a 10-inch movement, but because they were still in broken ground at that point, one of those would have been reduced by 1, by which point they would have been out. So I was able to move them up to here, and I still have 1 initiative left. Okay, so for the next initiative, one of his initiatives that he's allowed to do is order the formation to form up, which means that if the 2 groups are within 4 inches of one another, they can do that automatically without rolling to see how far they can move. So I can simply bring this unit here forward to form a line like so. Just fits into that gap between the field boundary and the broken ground, which is ideal. And having done that, that's both his initiatives employed. He's attached to them. So that is the end of his activation. And I thought I'd show you this to demonstrate this point about the initiatives, that the Leader 1, the Mutineer Leader 1, has just been activated, and he has 3 initiatives. And this group that he was with was way over here. But 3 initiatives allows you, as far as I can see, to activate for movement 6 times, because you get 2 actions per initiative, and you can get 2 movement per initiatives, which allows you 6 dice, and they've just moved 25 inches in 1 turn, at a walk as well, which allowed them then to change their direction. But that can be, it can seem disproportionate, but I'm sure I haven't got that rule wrong. It's either extremely badly worded, or I'm playing this correct. But if you imagine they could have moved round a flank, and then had they been a line regiment, say foot regiment, they could then have opened fire in the flank, all kinds of things. Or made a flank attack, a flank charge. It seems a little bit extreme to me, but keeps the game nice and fluid. Oh, and also another thing that happened just recently is that the mutineers have now got 4 command cards, and they did actually get 3 of these in a row, which would have triggered a random event. But what you do is look at the last activation that happened, and just before that, this unit had been deployed on the table. It's the last mutineer unit to come on the table, and deploying doesn't count towards random events. The last unit activated has to have either moved, and deploying isn't a movement, fired or had been performing a task. So none of those things, so random event one wasn't triggered. So that's things at this point. Right, so we're at the start of a new turn, and red leader 5 has just turned up, which is this guy here in charge of the native skirmishers. Now, he has an initiative of 1, so he can activate this unit for 2 actions. So I'm going to move first of all, and then fire. So they're going to move to about here, and then fire as a group at this line here. Now, being skirmishers, they don't have the controlled volley option, so they simply load, fire, and because it's the start of the game, they already have their muskets, or rather they've got rifles, these guys, they already have their rifles loaded, so it's just a question of moving with 1 action, firing with the second. So I'll show you how that works now. Right, so the first thing they're going to do is move, so they get 1d6, because the first action, 1d6. So they're going to move 4 inches towards the enemy. Right, now you measure the range, and again this is one of the areas of the rules that's a little bit vague, because it doesn't specify where you measure from and to, so I'm taking very kind of rough estimate from the centre of each group to the centre of the formation, which is about 15 inches, which for a rifle in these rules is deemed to be effective range. Between 12 and 24 inches is effective range. So it's not close and it's not long. Then you roll 1 dice per figure. So the officer doesn't count, the NCO doesn't count, so there are 6 skirmishers, so we roll 1 dice per figure. Now this is another area that I'm a little bit vague on, but I think you add, it does say for each status level of leader controlling fire. Now there's a difference between directing the fire, which you have to spend a command card on, and controlling the fire. I think controlling the fire just means ordering the fire. So I'm going to give, he's a status 1, so I'm going to give them an extra dice for that. Then this is another area where I really think the rules are a little bit vague, because at the moment the British player has 2 command cards, and at any stage in the game, let me read the rules. Any number of command cards may be used by a leader to increase his command initiative for the current turn. For each command card used, the leader may add 1 point of command initiative for the current turn. So I think what I'm going to do is use one of those cards, there we go, to increase his command initiative to 2. Now that has 2 effects. One is that it gives him another dice there, but the other is that he now has another 2 initiative points that he can spend to reload and fire again, which seems to me a much better use of the command card than just using it to enhance fire, which is another possibility, which gives you simply 1 extra d6. So I really don't get that. It sort of sheds doubt on my interpretation of the rules that each initiative point allows you to move or fire and so on. But at the same time, as I say, if you can spend an initiative point to fire and another one to direct the fire, then you have to have spent an initiative point in order to initiate the fire in the first place. So it seems a little bit cranky to me, But this seems to be the most favourite. As long as I keep it even for both sides, I don't suppose it matters. But it does make it quite overpowering. So anyway, he's status 2, and you now roll these at effective range. I need 5 or 6 to hit, and because they have got first fire ability, I can add +1 to the dice roll. So I need 4, 5 or 6 to hit. It's not a controlled volley. Skirmishes at effective or long range, which they are, add 1, so I need 3, 4, 5 or 6 to hit. Right, so that one misses, as does that. So I've got 6 hits. Now, the target is in the open, so I have to roll these now to see what effect those hits have. 6 will kill, 1 and 2 will miss, and 3 to 5 adds shock to the target unit. So I've got 2 kills, 2 misses, and 2 shocks. So I'll show you how that's spread around the target. Right, so you have to spread it evenly. There are 2 groups here making up the formation. So there have been 2 casualties, so I have to take 1 off of each group. And there were 2 shock, so I'm going to use microdice to represent the shock. So there's 1 point of shock on that group, 1 point on that. Now, there's a possibility of killing the leader, but it does say if a leader is attached to a group. It doesn't say if a leader is attached to a unit, and that's significant in this case because I'm going to say he's attached to that group there. What you do is you roll a dice, and it has to be, in the case of skirmishes firing at you, it has to be the result has to be equal or less than the dice roll of the number of casualties in order to possibly kill the leader. And as there's only been 1 casualty, I've got to roll 1 in order to injure him, and I have just made that roll, and I rolled a 3, so he's fine. So had it been the entire formation, I would have had to roll a 2 or a 1 in order to possibly wound or kill him. So a little bit unclear on that as well. And now what I can do is, because I've made this guy's initiative 2, he can now spend 2 more actions. He can make 1 more initiative, which is 2 actions, to do something else with those skirmishers. And because they've got rifles, it takes 2 actions to reload. So I'm simply going to say that he's ordering them to reload, and I don't have to put a marker on there to say they are out of ammunition or unloaded. They're back to normal. So that's the end of that little episode. While I'm at it, I will just explain what shock is, or I'll give you a brief description. Basically, as you build up shock, once you get more shock than figures, it can have an effect on your morale. When you get double the number of shock to figures, the unit more or less breaks, and whilst it's got shock, it affects the unit's movement, its firing abilities, and so on, all kinds of things. So while there's shock on it, it's got a slight problem, but you can rally shock off. Okay, now I've turned up the British Leader 1, which is this guy here. And as you can see, they're not a great distance now from this cavalry here. So what I'm going to attempt to do is to engage them in melee. Show you how melee works, which is called fisticuffs in this sort of rules. So he's status 3. He's got 3 initiatives. So at the moment they're only walking, but I'm going to increase them to a canter. You're allowed to go up 1. Oh, actually, if I do that though, they have to. Yeah, they can more. I'll say they're more or less pointing at them. they're allowed to kind of swing a little bit. Right, so I'm going to do this, one step at a time, because I want to kind of try and retain some of their initiative. So they're at a canter. They have to move. For the first initiative, they have to use both their actions for movement. That means, and they can increase the dice roll. I'll just have to check that. Get back to you in a second. Yeah, when they're at a canter, they add +3 to the dice roll. So they've got to roll 2 dice, add 3 to each of them. So they've got 4, 1 is 5, and add 6 to that is 11. So they can move 11 inches. Right, now 11 inches just about gets one figure, in fact the leader figure, in contact with one figure there. And it doesn't say that you have to kind of group the figures together or anything like that, so I think that is sufficient contact to trigger the melee. But again, a little bit kind of vague, the rules, but I think that's sufficient. Okay, so we work out how many dice to roll. So the British are impact cavalry moving at a canter, so that isn't, they get 9d6 for being that. 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9. The mutineers are non-impact cavalry, or just any cavalry at a walk, is 6d6. So stepping the British cavalry up has given them a 3 dice advantage, which is worth noting. Now, impact cavalry, the mutineers are deemed to be scouting cavalry, and impact cavalry is a different troop quality to scouting cavalry. It's 2 classes higher, which will make a difference in a moment. For each leader attached to the group fighting, both have their status 3 leaders attached. You add 1d6 per status, so both sides get 3 extra dice for that. Any command cards being used to add zeal to a force? Well, the British have got 2 available, the mutineers none, so I think I'm going to use 1. So that gives them 1d6 per card. Now, this is interesting again, you see, that I could have used that card to put the... I think this is wrong in the rules. I could have used that card to put the British leader's initiative up to 4, and that would have given him an extra dice there. And it would also have given him more initiatives to use later in the turn, which surely is a better way of doing it. But let's stick that I'm just putting his dice roll up by 1. Right, for each quality level higher, and as I said, it's 2 quality levels higher, the British are 2 quality levels higher, you get 2d6 per group. So they get another 4 dice for being higher quality. So the British are really stacking up the dice now. Then there are various dice you can add if they have qualities, which neither of these have, I think. There's things like aggressive. The British Company Cavalry and the Mutiny, they both have a quality called Tally-Ho. I must look that up while I'm... see what that... Tally-Ho, page 85. Cavalry attack with elan, right. So when 2 command cards are used with a leader's activation, it can add 1 additional d6 of movement. Right, don't need that. Add 2d6 per group fighting in any resultant fisticuffs. Right, so too late to do that. Don't think it would have made a big difference anyway. So Tally-Ho doesn't come into it, so we can ignore that for the time being. And that's all the adjustments that you make. So you roll the dice, and each 5 inflicts a kill on the enemy, and each 6 inflicts 1 kill and 1 point of shock. So let's roll all these dice and then get rid of everything that's not a 5 or a 6. I'm going to call that a 5. Right, so the mutineers have inflicted 3 kills and 1 shock on the British, and the British have inflicted 2 kills and 2 shocks on the mutineers. And sorry, while I remember it, we do the same thing with the see if a leader has been affected. So the British have suffered 3 kills, so if I roll less than 3 on a d6, no, I don't. And the mutineers have suffered 2 kills. So if I roll 1 on the dice, no, so both the leaders are okay. Right, so I put some micro dice there, 1 there and a 2 there to represent the shock, but what you're really interested in now is the number of killed. And the British have lost 3 dead to the mutineers 2, which means that the British have lost the fisticuffs and they are pushed back, and they're pushed back 6 inches per difference, so they're pushed back 6 inches because there's a difference of 1, but that's doubled because they're mounted cavalry, so they're going to get pushed back 12 inches facing the enemy. Alright, so I've moved the British back 12 inches, and because they've been obliged to withdraw, this comes under the category of bad things happen. So you roll a dice, and in the case of withdrawing, on a 1, 2 or 3 nothing happens, on a 4, 5 or 6 the force's morale goes down by 1. Oh, cocked. Let's try that again. So it's a 3, so nothing happens. Now, if you remember, that guy has only so far spent 1 initiative, this leader here, so he's still got 2 initiatives left. So I can use that to rally shock off, or even to move them back into contact again. But I think I'm going to try and use it to rally the shock off. Right, so he spends 1 initiative point per shock, so that can come off. And then he's still got another initiative, which, as far as I can tell, he can now spend to try and attack these guys again. So they're at a canter, so they roll 2 dice and add 3 to each dice. So they've rolled 6, so that will give them 12, which we know they've just retired 12. So this seems a bit strange, I know, but as far as I can tell it's legal. So they can just move back into contact again and fight another round of melee. Right, because the British aren't below half strength yet, they still roll the same number of dice, so it's the same dice roll as before, the only difference being I'm not going to spend a command card this time, because all it does is give you 1 extra dice, and I really don't think that's economic. You're much better off spending it increasing a leader's initiative or something like that, so I think that's a quirk of the rules, unless I'm completely misunderstanding the rule. So 5s or 6s we're interested in. Get rid of that. So the British have done a bit better this time. The mutineers have inflicted 2 shock on the British, but the British have killed 1, 2, 3 mutineers and inflicted 4 shock. Okay, so there's 3 casualties on the mutineers, so if they roll 1 or 2, then there's a chance that the leader has been injured in some way. Yeah, right, so we'll have to factor that in as well. Right, so you roll a d6, and it's a 6, which means he has a light wound, so his status is reduced by 1 level, so he goes down to level 2 from level 3. The mutineers have been defeated by 3-0, and that means that they have to retreat 24 inches away from the enemy, which pushes them off of the table. So they are out of the game, and the leader goes with them. Now, I'll just check that, I'm pretty sure he does go with them. Yeah, he does. It says leaders, if they're with a unit that's pushed off the table, they rout with them. Now again, that strikes me as a little bit incongruous, because had he been killed instead, there's a possibility for a killed leader to be replaced by another leader who would come on as 1 status below this guy. But as he's been pushed off, there's no opportunity to replace him whatsoever. And my other question about the rules would be, where does he come back on? Does he come back on with the group? If he were to come back on, did he come back on with the group that he was leading? Does he emerge from that group? I suppose he does, yeah. I suppose he does. Right, anyway, they're coming off, and that's going to affect this side's morale. Now, when a bad thing happens, I think you're supposed to test for morale immediately. There isn't a kind of morale phase at the end of the turn or anything like that. And I've just noticed that if a leader receives a wound, which the mutineer leader did, you're supposed to roll for morale for that. So it says status 3 or 4 level leader wounded, roll a dice, and 4 means that force morale is reduced by 1 point. So it's going to go down by 1 point anyway. And then, if a status 3 or 4 leader routs from the table, you roll the dice again, and that's a 1, which means that the force morale has gone down another 2 points. So we have to take 3 points off of the force morale. So they go down from 10 to 7, which is fine for the time being. And the very next card is the Tiffin card, which means that's the end of that turn. So an awful lot didn't happen. Look at all those cards that didn't get played in that turn. So at the end of the turn, each side can spend any unused command cards, and the mutineers don't have any, but the British do, and that allows the British are allowed to activate 1 unit. So to make the best use out of it, I think we're going to activate this formation here. Right, so when you use a card in this way at the end of a turn, you're activating the unit and not the leaders. So you're allowed to spend 2 actions, could be firing, moving, whatever, but you can't take shock off because it's the leader that is spending his initiative to take shock off, if that makes sense. So that unit there, for instance, had they not been activated, I couldn't have used, I couldn't have reduced that shock. So I've moved this unit up. I rolled 7 on 2 action dice, which is the 2 actions, so they've moved up in column a little bit further round, and that is the end of that turn. Okay, so a bit further on in the game now, and I've just turned up the leader card for this leader here, and what I want to do with this unit, I just thought I'd show you, is they're regular infantry, just like this formation here. So my ultimate aim is for them to kind of all join up in one formation around here somewhere. But to do that, I'm going to have to sort of move them at a fairly fast rate. So I wanted them to run rather than walk. Now, you can run. What it means is that you add an extra dice. So for one action, for instance, you would normally roll one dice. So you would roll two. But then, having run, you get 1 point of shock. It sort of represents a bit of disorder. And what that means is that then every time you move towards the enemy, if you have shock, you have to reduce 1 inch of movement. So to cut it short, what I'm planning to do is to run with the first action, get a point of shock, walk with the first action, and then run with the second action, which will give me 2 dice for the second action. That's 1 initiative, triggers 2 actions, and then use the second initiative to rally off the 1 point of shock that I've created. Okay, so that's an example of how having a higher status leader does allow you to do a little bit more. So that's where the group has ended up, and they're now within 4 inches of this formation here, which means that when this leader here is activated, he will be able to order this unit to form up with this one, I think, meaning that I could probably form a line out of all these groups. No, change your plan, because the Tiffin card has appeared immediately, meaning that's the end of that turn. So we reshuffle the deck and then start the next turn. There are no command cards out on the table to use. Right, now I've turned up Leader 1's card in the next turn, who is this guy here. So his status 3, got an initiative of 3 therefore, and I'm going to use 2 of those initiative points to rally off the 2 shock, and then use the final one. They're at a canter at the moment, they can go up or down 1, so I'm going to order them down to a walk, and then they're going to do 2 walking actions to allow them to change direction and walking that direction, and they'll be threatening the flank of the mutineers over here if they do that. Okay, now I just want to show you this as an example of how you can kind of get bogged down by the wording of the rules. I've just turned up the card to activate this leader here. Now, as I said earlier, my intention is to get this formation and this group, who are all the same troop type, together in one formation. And there is an action that you can do, which is called form up. Now, I can't find anywhere in the rules where it says you're allowed to order a formation to form up with a group, which kind of makes sense. If I'd got the card for that one, I could have ordered this group to form up with a formation, but not a formation to form up with a group. So I think I'm not allowed to do that. The only thing I'm going to be able to do is to order this open column to form up so that it creates a line, and then hopefully when this guy's card turns up, I can then order that group to form a line at the other end, and I'll have achieved my purpose. But it then creates another problem, because I'll have 2 leaders attached to the same formation, which you're allowed to do, but only the higher status leader is allowed to order the formation in manoeuvres and so on, and they're both of the same status. And again, I can't find anything in the rules to tell you what you do in that circumstance. Do you just say designate one as being the higher status than the other? If not, then it means both could give orders to the formation, and you could end up moving sort of quadruple amounts rather than double amounts and so on, because they're both status 2. And I don't think that's feasible. But it's another kind of omission from the rules or a question for the FAQs. But as I say, with the second edition, you would think that this kind of circumstance had arisen at some point during the first edition rules, and that it had been cleared up and sorted out for the second edition. Anyway, I just thought I'd show that as an example of how if the rules aren't thoroughly and precisely written, you can end up with lots of circumstances where you have to come to an amicable agreement with your opponent about what to do. And here we are, I've achieved my aim, because I turned this guy's card up shortly after, and he was able to order that group to form up with this line. So now I have a formation that has 2 leaders, both of the same status, and I've decided I'm going to call this guy here, because he's leader 2 and this guy's leader 3. This guy's going to be the senior one, but theoretically I've got a command card on this side. I could play it to raise this chap's initiative a level and make him a status 3, meaning he outranks this guy, and then he would be allowed to order the formation even though this chap had already ordered the formation to make some movement actions this turn, meaning I could get yet another movement out on this line which has already moved this turn. So again, I think you just have to be kind of sensible about what you think a unit can achieve in a given turn. But it does seem to me that the rules allow you to make dramatic movement distances and so on. I mean, for instance, that group over there has moved enormously in comparison to some of these groups which have barely moved at all. It's just my feeling of the rules is that they do allow a lot of disproportionate kind of actions from certain groups. And yes, I mean, part of the point is to give these leaders a little bit of character, turn it into a sort of skirmish game where they can act heroically. But it's all a little bit too, what's the word, open to interpretation. I think that's not a word, it's several words, but that's what I'm trying to say. And again, I've turned up the Tiffin card really early in the play, so there are all these cards not played, and the only cards that have been turned up so far are 3 red cards for 3 of the leaders and 1 red command card. So in other words, the mutineers aren't going to have an opportunity to move or do anything this turn, and I can still use that red command card to activate one of the units that hasn't been activated this turn, either that one or that one on the British side. So I'm going to order this unit here to shoot again at this formation, which will inflict more casualties. But again, it's another kind of example of how there's no kind of balance in the game. Single units can make dramatic advances, and the other side can't react or do anything at all. So the whole game gets very kind of disjointed. I'm sounding a bit negative of it. I'm not. I do like it. I think it's an interesting experiment in trying to combine the mechanics of a war game, a large-scale war game, with a skirmish war game, and I like it a lot from that point of view. But the rules themselves are very, very kind of open and very unrealistic in terms of what you can do with units. I've heard that criticism of Black Powder with the ability for units to move 3 times and so on in one move, but this is way in excess of that. So the skirmishers fired their rifles. They inflicted 2 kills, so I've taken another figure off of each of the 2 groups, and again, because only 1 casualty came from that group, there's no way that this leader could have been injured, and because it takes 2 turns, so there were 2 actions. First action was to fire, second action was to reload, but it takes 2 actions to reload a rifle, so I've put a marker on here to show that they still require 1 action in order to be reloaded, and that's the end of that turn.